What would happen if, in a moment of pain, an unexpected connection emerged that changed everything? Marcia, at 55 years old, participates in a sacred ritual every week, visiting the grave of her beloved husband, Eduardo, who passed away a few years ago. The pain of loss accompanies her, but it is in this space of memory and longing that she finds a bit of solace. One Saturday, upon arriving at the cemetery, Marcia is confronted with a scene that leaves her perplexed. A 7-year-old boy is sitting on her husband's gravestone, also named Eduardo. The coincidence of the name ignites a whirlwind of emotions within her, ranging from curiosity to concern. As she approaches the boy, Marcia finds herself faced with questions she didn't expect. The boy, when asked about his parents, reveals that an unknown man brought him there. Anguish takes over Marcia, who already carries the pain of loss and now feels responsible for a child who seems so vulnerable. The man who accompanied the boy does not appear, and overwhelmed with worry, Marcia decides to call the police, feeling she cannot ignore the maternal instinct that arises within her. As the police investigate the situation, a shadow from the past begins to take shape. The man who brought the boy is discovered to have a criminal history, which intensifies the urgency of the situation. The arrival of Dario, the boy's father, brings a mix of relief and tension. He thanks Marcia for taking care of his son, revealing to her that Eduardo's mother, Isabella, is an irresponsible woman with alcohol problems. The revelation weighs on Marcia, who not only finds herself faced with the responsibility of caring for a boy but also confronted with her own daughter, whose abandonment has deeply hurt her. The plot thickens further when it is revealed that Isabella, the boy's mother, is actually Marcia's daughter. This new development creates a devastating emotional conflict. Marcia finds herself torn between the protection of her grandson and the pain of her daughter's betrayal. Isabella, in turn, faces the consequences of her neglect, while Dario fights for custody of Eduardo, gaining custody and leaving Isabella in tatters. As days pass, Isabella tries to reconnect with her son and mother. The path is not easy, and the story unfolds showing her attempts to rebuild what was lost. Time, which is often an enemy, can also be an ally, and in the end, the reunion of the three creates an emotional moment of unity at Eduardo's grave, the grandfather. The visit becomes a milestone of emotional renewal and hope, signaling that despite the difficulties, it is possible to find new beginnings and heal deep wounds. Life is full of twists and turns, and Marcia, Isabella, and Eduardo learn that the most unexpected connections can arise in the darkest moments, bringing with them the light of hope and the promise of a better future. Marcia watched the boy sitting on her husband Eduardo's gravestone. Confusion and concern washed over her in waves. The boy, with his messy hair and big eyes, seemed lost in thought, oblivious to the world around him. What could such a small boy be doing in a place like that? She approached hesitantly, her heart racing, anxious to understand the situation. The image of her husband, with his welcoming smile, came to mind, and the pain of his absence intensified. When the boy told her that a man had brought him there, Marcia's maternal instinct awoke strongly. She couldn't ignore the vulnerability of that child, and soon decided that she needed to act. The idea of calling the police made her feel nervous, but the concern for the boy's well-being was stronger. The past pain she carried, the loss of Eduardo, now became an additional weight as she faced the possibility that the boy might be in danger. The arrival of the police brought a mix of relief and apprehension. The officers were attentive, but Marcia couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility. The boy, who introduced himself as Eduardo, had a sad look that touched her deeply. During the wait, she began to reflect on her own life, the difficulties she faced after her husband's death, and how loneliness consumed her. The following weeks and months became an endless cycle of visits to the cemetery, and now, that child made her re-evaluate everything. When Dario, the boy's father, appeared, the tension in the air became palpable. He was a weary-looking man, but his eyes carried a fierce determination. Marcia noticed the way he looked at his son, a mix of love and concern. Dario thanked Marcia, and she felt a momentary relief, but also a strange connection with him. He was battling his own demons, and the story he told about Isabella, Eduardo's mother, hit her like an arrow. Her daughter's irresponsibility made her feel an anger she didn't know still existed within her. As days passed, Marcia's life became even more complicated. Isabella, her daughter, began to show up. The young woman, with a lost look and an air of desperation, was trying to mend broken ties. Marcia found herself in a deep emotional conflict. On one hand, she wanted to help Isabella get back on her feet. On the other, her daughter's betrayal had hurt her deeply. It was as if an abyss separated her from the two figures who had once been so dear to her. Visits to the cemetery became an emotional battleground. On one of those days, while Marcia sat in silence before Eduardo's gravestone, she saw Isabella approaching. The young woman hesitated, as if each step she took was an internal struggle. When they finally sat down next to each other, the tension was palpable. Isabella began to talk about her difficulties, about how addiction had consumed her, but Marcia felt a resistance within herself. It was hard to hear her daughter speak about her mistakes, and the pain of betrayal was still fresh. A new wave of challenges arose. Marcia found herself questioning her inner strength, wondering if she would be able to forgive Isabella and, at the same time, care for Eduardo, the grandson she barely knew. Each day, the attempts to reconnect with her daughter were filled with failures. The fear of being disappointed again kept her at a distance, and guilt haunted her. What could she do to help without hurting herself in the process? Dario's presence became increasingly important in Marcia's life. He was a strong and determined man, and his fight for custody of his son became a source of inspiration. The way he dedicated himself to Eduardo made Marcia see a glimmer of hope for the future. But at the same time, she questioned whether she could be a present grandmother, whether she could open herself up to this new family dynamic. Dario's struggle made her reflect on her own battles, and the memory of Eduardo accompanied her every step. Marcia felt she was on a path filled with obstacles, where every choice seemed laden with consequences. Emotions enveloped her like a storm, and amidst it all, she knew she needed to find a way to rise again. Life was testing her in ways she had never imagined, and the strength she needed to discover was hidden within her, waiting to be revealed. Marcia felt the weight of Eduardo's absence in every detail of her life. The pain of loss had become a part of her, but now, with the presence of Eduardo, her grandson, and the unexpected appearance of Isabella, her daughter, what had once been a solitary morning transformed into an emotional storm. The boy, with his innocent gaze, seemed to be a beacon in the darkness, but he also brought to the surface memories she preferred to bury. As the days went by, Marcia began to notice that her routine was changing. Visits to the cemetery became less frequent, not because she was forgetting Eduardo, but because the presence of Eduardo, her grandson, demanded a new attention from her. It was hard for her to accept that she was beginning to love again, even if in a different way. The boy, while being a constant reminder of her pain, also became a symbol of hope. Dario, for his part, was increasingly involved in the fight for custody of his son. Marcia admired his dedication, but it also left her anxious. He seemed to be an exemplary father, and the contrast with her own relationship with Isabella troubled her. While Dario appeared strong and determined, Marcia felt lost. That feeling of inadequacy followed her like a shadow. With each conversation she had with Dario, she realized that, in her own way, she was drifting away from Isabella, and that left her in conflict. Isabella, on the other hand, seemed more fragile with each passing day. The young woman was fighting her demons, but Marcia couldn't fully feel supportive. The betrayal she felt still burned in her heart, and the attempts to repair their bond were like walking through a minefield. Whenever Isabella came to visit her, Marcia found herself torn between the need to help her daughter and the desire to protect her own heart. Isabella's attempts to explain her mistakes often ended in arguments. What should have been a fresh start turned into a cycle of failures and disappointments. On a rainy afternoon, while Marcia was at home, she received a message from Isabella. The young woman asked to meet. Marcia's heart tightened. She knew that this meeting could be a chance for a fresh start, but she also feared it would end in more misunderstandings. At the same time, an impulse made her accept the invitation. It was time to face the issues that troubled her. What could have been a reconciliation conversation quickly turned into a heated argument. Isabella, feeling attacked, shouted that her mother had never supported her. Those words cut Marcia like knives. Old wounds surfaced, and the conversation rapidly spiraled out of control. After that misunderstanding, Marcia felt exhausted. The emotional weight of that relationship wore down her soul. At the same time, the image of Dario and Eduardo reminded her of what could be a new life. She wanted to be a present grandmother, but the internal battle between forgiving her daughter and accepting her grandson left her distressed. Each day, the struggle with her own feelings seemed more challenging. How could she love a child who was the flesh of someone who had hurt her? The relationship with Dario also began to complicate. While he fought for Eduardo, Marcia found herself in the role of a spectator, wanting to be part of that fight but not knowing how. One day, while they were talking, Dario mentioned the importance of having a solid family foundation for Eduardo. That phrase resonated with Marcia, and a new wave of insecurity hit her. Would she be able to be that foundation? Doubt consumed her. He seemed to believe she could, but the fear of failing again paralyzed her. Faced with so many conflicts, Marcia decided she needed to seek help. She began attending a support group for people dealing with grief and complicated family relationships. The meetings became a safe space where she could share her pain and hear stories that reflected her own journey. Listening to others talk about their struggles, Marcia began to understand that overcoming was not a linear path. It was filled with ups and downs, failures and fresh starts. Over time, Marcia realized that the journey was not just about forgiving Isabella or becoming the perfect grandmother for Eduardo. It was, above all, a quest for self-knowledge and acceptance. She began to apply the lessons she learned in the meetings to her daily life, facing her limitations and learning to deal with the pain and anger she felt. The process was not easy, but each small victory brought a new breath of life. As life around her continued to change, Marcia felt she was slowly rising again. The journey of overcoming was far from over, but she was willing to face the challenges that lay ahead. With each step, Marcia moved closer to a new version of herself, a version that could accept the past and embrace the new opportunities life had to offer. The path was full of uncertainties, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to walk that road. On a sunny afternoon, Marcia decided to take Eduardo to the park. The boy was excited, running back and forth, while Marcia watched his brightness and the lightness with which he lived. This was the first time she allowed herself to feel a bit of joy since the death of Eduardo, her son. Her grandson's smile was contagious, and for a brief moment, she forgot her worries. While they played, Marcia saw Dario approaching with a worried look. He was visibly agitated, and when he got closer, his voice trembled. Marcia felt a chill in her stomach as she noticed his expression. Something was happening. He asked Marcia to follow him to a quieter corner of the park, away from curious eyes. Concern grew in her heart. Upon arriving at an isolated location, Dario revealed that he was facing legal troubles with Eduardo's mother. She had decided to contest custody and was seeking a lawyer to try to keep Dario out of the child's life. Those words hit Marcia like a punch to the stomach. The fear of losing Eduardo, even though she wasn't his mother, deeply shook her. The thought that the boy could be taken away from her was unbearable. Dario continued to talk about the threats he was receiving, and Marcia realized he was fighting a difficult battle alone. He needed support, and the idea that she might not be by his side left her distressed. "I don't know if I can handle this, Dario," Marcia said, her voice trembling. "What if I'm not good enough to help?" Her words echoed in her own heart. The doubt that had always accompanied her about her ability to be a good mother and grandmother resurfaced. Marcia felt a knot form in her throat. Dario looked her in the eyes, and she saw the determination reflected in those eyes. "You are stronger than you think, Marcia. Eduardo needs both of us." Dario's statement made Marcia reconsider her choices. She realized that by closing herself off in her pain and insecurity, she was also distancing herself from the possibility of becoming an important figure in Eduardo's life. At that moment, the emotional storms surrounding her began to dissipate. She needed to face her fears, not just for herself, but for the child who depended on love and stability. Marcia decided that she could no longer let herself be carried away by her past failures. Dario's fight for custody of Eduardo was not just a legal battle, but an opportunity for her to rise and become the grandmother the boy needed. The idea of joining Dario, of supporting him in the custody fight, made her heart race. It was time to set aside the pain and anger she felt towards Isabella and focus on what really mattered, Eduardo. With this new perspective, Marcia began to prepare for the battle ahead. She knew she would have to face Eduardo's mother and the difficulties that would arise, but for the first time, she felt willing to fight. What once seemed like an insurmountable mountain was now a challenge she was ready to confront. When they returned to where Eduardo was playing, Marcia looked at her grandson and felt a wave of love and protection. She could not allow anyone to take that child away from her. It was time to leave the past behind and embrace the future. Dario's revelation and the urgency of the situation propelled her to act. Marcia began to plan what she could do to help. She remembered the support meetings she had attended and the strength she found in sharing her experiences. Now, she wanted to use that strength to become an ally to Dario and a present grandmother to Eduardo. As she watched the boy run and play, Marcia made a promise to herself. She would no longer be a spectator in her own life. She was ready to face the challenges to come, willing to fight for the family she wanted to build around Eduardo. The path would be difficult, but the determination that was growing inside her was stronger than any doubts that might arise. Thus, with a new purpose, Marcia began to transform. The journey of overcoming was just beginning, but she was willing to face the ups and downs, the fresh starts, and the lessons that life still had to offer. And, alongside Dario and Eduardo, she felt that she had finally found a reason to fight. Marcia felt that from that moment on, her life had changed. The determination that had taken hold of her drove her to act, but the reality surrounding her was still complex and intimidating. Upon returning home, she realized that the weight of responsibility now felt greater, but also more meaningful. Eduardo was not just a grandson, He was the light in the darkness that had dominated her life after her son's death. That night, as she prepared for bed, Marcia couldn't shake the thoughts from her mind. What would happen if Eduardo's mother actually gained custody? The fear of losing the boy lingered, but now, instead of paralyzing her, that fear transformed into fuel for her fight. She decided she would educate herself about custody rights and what she could do to help Dario. The first step would be to seek legal support. The next morning, Marcia woke up early. With a cup of coffee in hand, she began researching lawyers who specialized in custody cases. With each click, her nerves increased. What was expected of her? How could she help Dario? She knew she needed to prepare for the conversations ahead. Meanwhile, Dario was also struggling. He was distressed, worried about the consequences this legal battle could have not just for him, but also for Eduardo. Marcia decided she needed to talk to him. They met at a nearby cafe, and upon seeing the worried expression on Dario's face, Marcia felt that their fight was shared, even if the burdens they carried were different. "I found some lawyers who can help," Marcia said, trying to convey confidence. "We can meet and see how we can act together." Dario looked at her, his expression softening a bit. "Thank you, Marcia. I really need you by my side." She felt a sense of relief upon hearing those words. It was a recognition that her help was valuable. The conversation quickly turned into planning. They discussed every detail they could address at the hearing. Marcia began to realize that despite the fear, their unity could be the key to protecting Eduardo. However, as the days passed, the challenges began to accumulate. Marcia faced moments of loneliness and insecurity. She felt vulnerable having to confront Isabella, Eduardo's mother. Memories of her own pain, of her loss, haunted her. On some nights, she found herself awake, recalling moments with her son, which made her cry in silence. But instead of letting herself be overwhelmed, she began to channel that pain into determination. Marcia committed to staying strong. She began attending support groups that met weekly, where she shared her experiences and listened to the stories of others. The strength she found there was comforting and encouraging. These meetings helped her understand that she was not alone and that there were others fighting their own battles. The support she received reinforced her determination to fight for Eduardo. One day, while walking through the park where she had taken Eduardo, Marcia encountered a woman who was also watching her grandson. They started talking, and the woman shared her own struggle for custody of her grandson, who was also in the midst of a difficult process. Marcia listened attentively, feeling connected to that woman. Her story inspired Marcia to keep persevering, to not give up even in the face of adversity. Days turned into weeks, and as the day of the hearing approached, Marcia began to feel the pressure mounting. Dario was increasingly anxious, and that reflected in the atmosphere between them. Marcia tried to be the anchor, but doubts still haunted her. She wondered, what if they weren't enough? What if Eduardo's mother got what she wanted? On the night before the hearing, Marcia sat in her living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. She looked at a photo of Eduardo on her desk, a radiant smile on his face. In that moment, she realized she was not just fighting for him, but also rediscovering herself. The love she felt for her grandson was the force that drove her to face her fears and insecurities. With her heart racing, Marcia decided that no matter what happened, she would give her best. The fight would not be easy, but she was willing to face any obstacle that came her way. What mattered was that, alongside Dario, she was not alone. Together, they would fight for Eduardo's well-being, and this union made her stronger every day. Thus, with a new perspective, Marcia was ready for whatever the future held. Marcia was determined to face the challenges that arose in her life, especially the fight for Eduardo's custody. The fear of losing her grandson consumed her, but instead of paralyzing her, that fear turned into fuel that propelled her to act. In her quest for justice and protection, she began to educate herself about custody rights and seek legal support. With each step she took, Marcia felt she was breaking the barriers of loneliness and uncertainty that had accompanied her since her son's death. The nights were particularly difficult. In moments of silence, memories of her son flooded her mind, bringing forth deep pain. But instead of allowing herself to be overwhelmed by that sadness, she decided to channel her emotions into strength. Participating in support groups became a way not only to share her pain but also to learn from the experiences of others. Marcia realized she was not alone in her struggle. There were others facing similar battles, and that encouraged her to continue. The friendship that began to blossom between Marcia and Dario was one of the turning points in her journey. As they met to discuss strategies for the hearing, they became a support for one another. Marcia, who once felt fragile and insecure, began to realize that her voice had value. Dario, in turn, also felt strengthened by Marcia's presence. Together, they prepared for what was to come, and this union became a source of strength. As the day of the hearing approached, Marcia found herself battling anxiety. She questioned whether she truly had what it took to face Isabella. But amid this whirlwind of emotions, a new perspective began to emerge. Marcia realized that the fight for Eduardo was not just about winning or losing, but about the love she felt for him and the desire to provide him with a safe and loving home. On the eve of the hearing, while looking at the photo of Eduardo, Marcia had a moment of reflection. It was a smile that reminded her of the joy and innocence of childhood. She realized that regardless of the outcome of the hearing, the true victory would be finding peace in her heart and knowing she was doing the best she could. This realization brought a new understanding to her life. Success was not just about winning custody, but about fighting for what truly mattered. On the day of the hearing, Marcia felt a mix of nervousness and determination. As she entered the courtroom, she recalled all the conversations she had with Dario and the advice she received in the support groups. She was ready to face not only the imposing figure of Isabella but also the doubts that still haunted her. With every word she spoke, Marcia felt her confidence grow. She was becoming an advocate not only for Eduardo but for herself. The outcome of the hearing was uncertain, but Marcia had already learned valuable lessons along the way. She realized that true wealth lay in the ability to love and fight for those she cared about. Success was in allowing herself to feel the pain, but also in finding the strength to move forward. And above all, the friendship she had built with Dario helped her grow in ways she never imagined possible. At the end of that day, regardless of what happened, Marcia knew she had transformed. She had faced her fears, allowed herself to ask for help, and become a strong and resolute figure in Eduardo's life. And even though the journey was far from over, she was ready for whatever lay ahead. What mattered was that, with love and determination, she had found her way, and that path was now filled with hope and new possibilities. The courtroom was filled with palpable tension. Marcia felt her heart race as she entered the room, her eyes quickly fixating on Isabella, who sat confidently surrounded by a team of lawyers. The atmosphere was heavy, as if every word spoken there could change Eduardo's fate. The memory of her grandson's smile motivated her, but anxiety enveloped her like a cloak. The judge entered, and everyone stood up. After the initial greeting, the parties were invited to present their arguments. Marcia listened to Isabella's words, which portrayed her as a grandmother incapable of providing a safe environment for Eduardo. With each assertion, Marcia's chest tightened, but she remembered the conversations with Dario and the support she had received in the groups. It was time to stand up. When it was her turn to speak, Marcia felt her hands trembling, but determination began to speak louder. She stood up, took a deep breath, and began to express her love for Eduardo. She talked about the nights she had spent awake, worrying about his well-being, and how every moment spent with her grandson was a gift. Her voice was steady, her words filled with emotion. Marcia emphasized that her only desire was to provide a home where Eduardo felt loved and protected. As she spoke, she realized she was not just defending her position, she was expressing her truth. Tears began to slip down her face, but she didn't care. What mattered was the love she felt, not just for Eduardo, but for everything she had learned on this journey. The struggle was not just about custody, but about the strength she had found within herself, about her failures and how she had started over, always seeking the best for the boy. Dario, who was in the audience, watched her with pride, and that encouraged her even more. Marcia remembered all the times she had felt lost, insecure, and alone. But now, here, in front of everyone, she felt strong. The image of Eduardo playing and laughing illuminated her mind. She was not just fighting for legal rights but for a future where love and safety reigned. Isabella, sensing Marcia's emotional strength, tried to interrupt. But the judge silenced her, allowing Marcia to continue. She then spoke about the importance of family, how Eduardo needed a home where he could grow up surrounded by love. It was a heartfelt appeal that touched not only the judge but also those present in the room. Marcia was sharing the essence of what it means to be a grandmother. After her words, it was Isabella's turn to present her closing argument. She spoke calculatedly, trying to dismantle the image Marcia had built. But the energy in the room had shifted. Marcia realized that her emotions were not just tears of sadness, but also of hope. She had found her voice and, with it, the strength she never knew she had. The judge withdrew to deliberate, and Marcia felt the weight of the weight. Looking at Dario, who gave her an encouraging smile, she knew that regardless of what happened, she had already won. The true victory lay in the courage to open up, to fight for what she loved, and to face her fears. Finally, the judge returned. The room fell silent as he began to speak. His words echoed in Marcia's mind, but what truly mattered was what she had learned. The judge announced the decision: Marcia would receive temporary custody of Eduardo, with the condition that regular follow-up sessions be maintained. Her heart raced, not just with victory but with the journey that had brought her to this point. Marcia felt enveloped in a wave of relief and emotion. She had overcome her challenges, and her friendship with Dario was solidified in that moment. Together, they stood up, ready to face the future. The courtroom had become a symbol of her rebirth, a reminder that the fight for love and family is always worth it. And above all, Marcia left knowing that true strength lies in the love one has and the courage to fight for it. Marcia left the courthouse with a light heart, but her mind was still full of thoughts and reflections. The sun shone brightly in the sky, as if celebrating her victory. By her side, Dario walked, his smile wide and encouraging. He had been more than a friend, he had become a pillar in her life, someone who helped her find the courage she didn't know she had. "You did it, Marcia," he said, looking at her with admiration. "It was incredible. Your words touched everyone." She smiled, feeling gratitude fill her. "I just spoke the truth. I only wanted the judge to know how much Eduardo means to me." Dario placed a hand on her shoulder. "And he heard you. Now it's time for you and Eduardo to build a new chapter." Marcia agreed, but she also felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The temporary custody was a first step, but it was not the end of the fight. She knew she would still have to work hard to show that she could take care of Eduardo and provide a safe and loving home. In the days that followed, Marcia immersed herself in her new routine. She dedicated herself to preparing Eduardo's room, transforming it into a cozy space filled with toys and books. Every detail was thoughtfully considered, as she wanted him to feel at home. At the same time, Marcia began attending the follow-up sessions recommended by the judge. It was a space where she could learn and reflect on her relationship with Eduardo, as well as better understand how to deal with the challenges of motherhood. One day, while organizing the toys, Eduardo came home from school. He entered the room, and his eyes lit up at the sight of the space Marcia had prepared. "Wow, Grandma! I love all of this." He ran to the toys, jumping with joy. Marcia watched her grandson with a smile on her face. His happiness was contagious, and the certainty that they were on the right path filled her with hope. "I'm glad you liked it, my love. This is your place, whenever you want to play." Eduardo, with a wide smile, began to play, and Marcia sat beside him. Amidst the laughter and games, she realized that despite the difficulties, she was creating precious memories. It was a simple moment, but filled with meaning, and she knew she was making a difference in the boy's life. In the follow-up meetings, Marcia learned the importance of communication. She began to open her heart and share her insecurities with Dario. "Sometimes, I'm afraid I'm not good enough for him. What if I fail?" Dario, always patient, replied, "Marcia, you're already doing more than expected. The mere fact that you care so much is a huge step. Don't be so hard on yourself. The love you have for Eduardo is the foundation of everything." These conversations helped Marcia understand that perfection was not what mattered. What truly counted was love, dedication, and the willingness to learn and grow. Over time, she felt more confident in her new role as a grandmother, and Eduardo began to open up more, sharing his joys and fears. One night, while they were sitting on the couch watching a movie, Eduardo turned to Marcia and said, "I really like living here, Grandma. You are the best." His words touched Marcia's heart deeply. She realized that despite the insecurities and challenges, she had created a home where love flourished. The battle in the courtroom had been just a part of her journey. Now, she was building a future alongside Eduardo. As the months passed, Marcia felt more comfortable in her role. She established a routine that included moments of fun, learning, and affection. The bond between grandmother and grandson grew stronger, and Isabella's fear seemed increasingly distant. Marcia knew that the fight for Eduardo was not over yet, but now she was armed with love, confidence, and a new perspective. On a quiet night, while Eduardo slept, Marcia sat at the table with a notebook and a pen. She began to write about her experiences, her challenges, and her achievements. It was a way to document her journey, but also to reflect on everything she had learned. With each word, she felt she was reconnecting with the strong and determined woman she had always been. Marcia smiled as she remembered how it all started and how she had gotten to that point. The true victory was not just the custody of Eduardo, but the discovery of herself, the courage to face her fears, and the certainty that love could overcome any obstacle. And so, with a heart full of hope, she was ready to face whatever came next. Marcia had transformed throughout her journey. What began as a battle for Eduardo's custody evolved into a rediscovery of her own strength and resilience. Every challenge faced, every tear shed, and every laugh shared helped her understand that true success was not just in winning a legal battle, but in building a home filled with love and safety. On that quiet night, as the sun set, Marcia looked into Eduardo's room. The space that once felt empty was now filled with life and joy. She recalled how lost and insecure she had felt, but now, seeing Eduardo play and smile, she realized she had created an environment where both of them could thrive. The difficulties she had faced became valuable lessons, and she began to understand that each obstacle was an opportunity for growth. Her friendship with Dario also played a crucial role in her transformation. He was not just a friend, he was a companion who encouraged her to believe in herself. The conversations they had helped her realize that she didn't need to be perfect, she just needed to care and be present. Marcia learned that the love she felt for Eduardo was what truly mattered, and that was enough. As time went by, Marcia felt more confident. She began to get involved in the community, participating in support groups and events, where she met other mothers and grandmothers facing similar challenges. Sharing her experiences made her realize she was not alone. Each story, each laugh, and each tear shared strengthened her spirit. It was a new beginning not only for her but also for other women seeking the courage to face their own challenges. Marcia and Eduardo's life was far from perfect, but now they were together, supporting each other. Marcia realized that true happiness was in the little things, in Eduardo's tight hug at the end of the day, in the stories told before bedtime, and in the warmth of shared laughter. These simple moments became the foundation of a new beginning. Then, on a sunny morning, while helping Eduardo get ready for school, she looked into his eyes and said, "You know, my love, life is full of challenges, but we can always find a way to overcome them together." Eduardo smiled, and Marcia felt that the love that bound them was stronger than any difficulty they had ever faced. With a heart full of gratitude, Marcia decided it was time to share her story. She started writing a blog, where she talked about her experiences, the ups and downs of motherhood, and the lessons she had learned along the way. Her intention was to inspire others to never give up, to believe that there is always a new chance, a fresh start, even in the most difficult situations. As her words reached other mothers, grandmothers, and caregivers, Marcia realized that her journey was not just about her and Eduardo, but about all those who struggle daily for love and happiness. She felt more connected to the world around her, and this filled her with hope. Marcia and Eduardo's life was a testament to the fact that, with love and determination, it is possible to start over and turn challenges into opportunities. Marcia's message was clear: never underestimate the power of love and courage. Each of us has a story to tell, and by sharing it, we can inspire others to find their own strength. Thus, Marcia invites everyone to reflect on their experiences and share their stories. May we support one another, remember that we are not alone, and that there is always a new tomorrow ahead. If you felt touched by this story, like and subscribe, for there are many more stories of overcoming and new beginnings to come. Together, we can make a difference.